week and said every now and then it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a lesson without PowerPoint. So I thought, well, let's just do that. And so we'll do that tonight. We'll look at the story of Yosef. Yosef. We call him Joseph. What a great story he is. What an inspiration that he is. So, I want to look at this from two perspectives tonight. First of all, we want to look, major point number one, is that we're going to have opportunities and what to expect. Opportunities and what to expect when we go through trials and difficulties. There's just absolutely nothing wrong with dreaming big, and we see in Genesis chapter 37, that's exactly what Joseph is doing. But where is he getting those dreams? Is Joseph just coming up with these dreams on his own? No, he's having these dreams, and they're coming from God. Let's notice the story. Most of us are familiar with it, but it certainly never does a bad thing to refresh our minds. It says, Jacob dwelt, see better without him, in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph being 17 years old. Now, you remember Joseph was born late in Jacob's life, and then his last son, who actually his mother died giving birth to, what was his name? Do you remember? Benjamin, that's right. The two sons of Rachel are Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph, 17 years old at this time. Madison, you're 17, right? Perfect example. That's how old Joseph is at this point. And Macy just turned 16, so 17 years old, and he's feeding the flock with his brethren. But I notice the point that the writer gives us. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Now, if you remember, those women weren't really what we would call wives. They were called concubines, which was a wife indeed, but a second-class wife, if you will. She was second class in that when there would be a death of the patriarch, the man, they would not receive as much inheritance. They would not receive as many things as would the true wives, those that were taken as wives instead of concubines. They were looked at as being married. He was not committing fornication as the law would have looked at it at that time, but they were what's called concubines. Remember, they were Rachel and Leah's handmaidens. And I think it's interesting there because that's who Joseph is with, and it brings out the point that that's the case. And notice, when he goes back to his father, Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. In other words, they're doing some things that they shouldn't have been doing, and what does Joseph do? Well, he tells on them. He's a snitch, right? A rat. Well, I tell you what, if somebody takes your stuff and somebody sees you doing that, or if you're walking by somewhere and somebody beats you up, aren't you glad that there are people who will say, hey, I saw that guy do it? Aren't we glad for people who will tell the truth? Who, when they see something, will say, hey, I watched that man do that to this car, or I watched that man kill that man or something. So, the idea of being a snitch or things of that nature, that's a good thing. Especially if you're not, of course you've got to not falsify the truth, but if you're speaking the truth, it's good to be a witness. It's good to tell people what you've seen when there's a crime being committed so that the people that did the crime can have the punishment. So he goes back and tells his daddy exactly what happened. But now notice there is a problem. Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Not only was he the son of his old age, but why else do you think that he would have preferred Joseph all the rest of them boys? Who was he the son of? Not just Jacob's old age, but Rachel. Rachel was very special to him. As a matter of fact, you remember that's who he wanted to marry initially and was kind of duped into marrying Leah, and then worked an additional 7 years to receive Rachel as his wife. And so he gives Joseph this coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that his father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peace unto him. See, his daddy should have been wiser than that. He should not have had favorites. You do that with children, you're going to create within the tribe, if you will, animosity. Is it natural to do that? I believe that there are some traits where you can get along with one child better than the other, but as a parent, you have got to do everything you can to make sure that you don't bring that out in life. Is it natural? Well, Jesus chose how many people to be his disciples? How many did he handpick? He chose 12, right? Well, did he have a special relationship with any of those 12? Well, yeah, everywhere he went without the 12 and just took some, who did he take? Peter, James, John. And then who is called the disciple whom Jesus loved? Who was that? John. So, I mean, even in a group environment like that, sometimes we have folks we get along better with. It's not that he didn't like the other 12, but when it comes to a parent, that what we call natural affection. You cannot choose one child over another, or as you will do here, you will create animosity. And notice this animosity was so deep, these men hated Joseph, and they wanted to kill him. They wanted to take his life. Well, now, folks, I don't know about you, but I've been pretty mad at people in times past, But to hate somebody so bad, I mean, here Joseph's done nothing. He simply talked to his daddy. He has a relationship with his daddy. His father's the one that is causing the problems here. Yet they hate him. They are going to take his life. That's amazing. They hated him yet the more in verse 5 because he dreamed a dream. Well, have you ever had a dream? Do you have any control over that? Have you ever been in one of those dreams you're going like, this is so stupid. I can't believe I'm dreaming this. Why will I not wake up, so weird? Like, people get taller or something. You're going like, man, this can't be happening. You're in a dream, but you can't wake yourself up. Well, anyway, he can't do anything about that. But they hated him yet the more because he tells them his dream. Notice what he says. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, verse 7. And lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. Behold, your sheaves stood around and made obeisance to my sheaf, which just means to bow. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? See, he's the younger one. That's not how things worked under the patriarchal law. As a matter of fact, Leah was the number one wife. She was the first wife. So Reuben, her firstborn, would have been the one that stood to get the blessing and the double inheritance or double portion divided among the 12. He'd get 2 of those portions, or 13. And then you have, if something happened to him, you would have others in front of him, Levi and Simeon, not to mention Judah. And then there were 2 other sons born to her. So Joseph doesn't have a claim to this. Yet they're saying, you would have us to serve you. And so that makes him even angrier. And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And yet he dreamed another dream. And notice in this dream, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to him. They bowed down to him. So here he tells his daddy the dream. And what does his daddy say? Son, would you have me and your mother to bow down as well as your brethren before you? Indeed, to bow down ourselves to the earth, in verse 10. Notice verse 11, and his brethren envied him. But his father observed the same. And his brethren went to feed the flock in Shechem. Now they're going to one place to feed the flock, and now Jacob's going to send Joseph, go check on your brother. Well, he goes to Shechem, they're not there. And so a guy sees him walking around, says, where are you doing? He says, well, I'm looking for my brethren. Do you know where they went? And so we find out in verse 17, they're going to Dothan. So he goes to Dothan, and when they see him coming, notice verse 18, they conspired against him to slay him. They want to kill him. And said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. We'll see how he dreams then. We'll just end his life. Reuben, the eldest, of course, hears that and says, let's not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into a pit. Lay no hand upon him. And notice why he said that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. His plan is to save that child. He's going to save him and take him back to his father and get him out of this situation. That's what Reuben wants to do, but it isn't going to work out, isn't he? I guess that Reuben must leave because they sat down there eating a little lunch in verse 25. And look, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels. And Judah has the idea, verse 26, what profit if we kill our brother? Why don't we sell him? Why don't we sell him? And that way we won't have shed innocent blood. Boy, it's great that they've got some conscience there, right? Verse 29, Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and his plan is blown. So he rents his clothes. He's upset. He is not going to be able to do what he wanted to do, and so now they've got to come up with a plan. So they take Joseph's coat, they dip it in some animal blood, and they take it home, and they show it to their daddy, and says, look what we found. is this your son's coat? And, of course, he says it is, and obviously he's been rent into pieces. And Jacob tears his clothes, a sign of mourning, put on sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And his sons and daughters rose up to cover him. He only had one daughter, but his daughters-in-laws would have been what's been spoken of here. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And imagine trying to live through that lie. But these guys are obviously going to be pretty good at it. They're going to stay with it for, many, many years. Trying to comfort your daddy, who you know exactly what happened. You know the boy really ain't dead. You could fix the situation, but you're already in it. You're not going to turn against the other 11. There's honor among thieves, I suppose. And so they're not going to say anything. They're going to live this lie. And notice what happens in verse 36. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Now, brother, I want to show you something. I've read this story I don't know how many times. I could probably tell you the story, from memory. You've read it. But something I'd been wasted upon me or I hadn't noticed. Notice that Potiphar is an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. Literally in the Hebrew, that idea of captain of the guard is chief of the executioners or chief of the slaughterers. Some believe that could be that maybe he was over the butchers and the cooks, but others think that it was his job, like the sheriff of a county, to execute judgment, the death penalty. His name it comes from the same word. Turn over with me, if you will, to chapter 41. Look at verse 45. Verse 45, Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, Zaphnath-Paaneah, and gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of Onan. And Joseph went out all over the land of Egypt. You see that word Potiphar? There's only one letter difference in that, in the Hebrew. And it's a contraction. Potiphar is a contraction of Potiphar. Potiphar means he whom Ra giveth. Now, do y'all know anything about Ra? R-A. He is the sun god of Egypt. And so this is a name, just like many names, even Native American names, it's describing something. Potiphar means a man whom Ra has given. That's what Potiphar's name means. Same big name you'd find there. But this man here is a priest. Something I wanted to show you. Notice in verse 36 of chapter 37 that he's called the captain of the guard. Now look at chapter 39, verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Once again, captain of the guard. But don't stop there. Look at chapter 40 at verse 4. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them and served them, and they continued season in war. We're at the prison now. We're at the prison, and this is the head prison person, but he's called the captain of the guard. And not only that, but look at chapter 41, verse 12. Chapter 41, verse 12. And there was a young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. Well, who have we looked at that's called a servant, the captain of the guard? Who have we looked at? His name's Potiphar. And some believe, and I can't really see a reason why, it kind of makes sense, that this Potiphar that we're reading about that bought Joseph is the captain of the prison. And there's a couple things that make sense with that. First of all, what's going to happen to Joseph? Well, Joseph is going to go home with this fellow Potiphar, and he's going to run the house. He's going to be the chief steward. It says Potiphar didn't even know what he had in his house. Joseph did it all. But what was the one hang-up at Potiphar's house that caused Joseph grief? You remember what it was? His wife. That's exactly right. And so she accuses Joseph. Do you remember what she accuses Joseph of? She had tried to seduce Joseph over and over again. He wouldn't listen to her and says, how in the world can I sin against my master and sin against God? So he wouldn't do that. He would not, lie with her. And so one day she's, getting, I guess, a little more aggressive than usual, and she grabs his cloak. Well, he keeps running. He runs right out of that overgarment. Now, he's not nude underneath it, but it is his outer garment. Well, she brings that to her husband, and she's going to show him that and use that as proof. And notice what she says. Let's look at, we're on chapter 39 now. The master's just happy as he can be. The Lord's prospering Joseph. Potiphar's got money coming left and right. Everything's working out for him. She, verse 12, grabs a hold of his garment. She screams and says, verse 14, she called unto the men of her house, spake to them, saying, See here, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us, and he came unto me to lie with me. And I cried out with a loud voice, none of which was true. And so in verse 17, when Potiphar comes home, she spake unto him, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in and to mock me. In other words, he wanted to be with me. And it came to pass, I lifted up my voice, and he fled. Well, notice verse 19. It came to pass, when his master heard the words, this is Potiphar, of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. Now, folks, I'm going to tell you something. I don't think Potiphar was mad at Joseph. You know who I think Potiphar was mad at? I think he's mad at his wife. Because you know what Potiphar knew? Potiphar knew nothing happened. I believe that. Why? Why would I say that? Where does Joseph go after this section here? Where does Joseph go? He goes to prison. But what prison does he go to? He goes to the Memphis, or what would be a Cairo country club for the indentured rich people. That's where he's going to go. He's going to go to the finest prison in all the land. And here he is, a Hebrew slave who's convicted, or who has been, the charges are that he has tried to rape a high officer in Pharaoh's government. What do you think they would do with a Hebrew slave? Off with his head. I mean, you know, he's done. But that isn't what happens. He goes to prison. His master takes him to prison. Notice what it says there. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, a place where, who's there? The king's prisoners were bound. Well, you know as well as I do, there's a lot of powerful people who are in jail today. And they're not in the same jails everybody else is in usually. Usually they're in pretty nicer places, and usually they're powerful people, and when they get out, they're still going to have some of that power. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the idea that opportunities arrive from familiar sources. Potiphar didn't kill Joseph. Matter of fact, he puts him in the closest thing to a country club prison that they've got. Had he done what she said, he would have been executed. I believe Potiphar understands that's the case, but it could be. If this head of the prison system is Potiphar, or at least knows Potiphar, what do you think Potiphar's saying? That's a good man right there. And I've got these books at home. Yeah, I'm going to be bringing them to you. And if you don't mind, would you let him sit down and balance those books every month? You know, he still wants to use Joseph's service, I would think. I would think. Joseph goes to prison and immediately picks up where he left off. He's going to do a great job. And so if it's not Potiphar that he's serving here, if it's some other captain of a different kind of guard, I don't know what that would be, because, you know, Potiphar is the chief of the executioners. He's the chief of the guard. He's the one that puts people to death and so forth for the Pharaoh, because that's exactly what we're going to have happen. Joseph is going to run across a couple of men here, important people, that are going, one of them is going to be a particularly great help for him. And so our opportunity, a lot of times, brethren, people you know are going to be your opportunities for help. They're the folks that are going to know you. They're the ones closest to you. So don't count them out. Appreciate the people that are around you. And look for opportunities for them to help you as well as you to help them. Well, number 2, under opportunities, chances to serve. One of the things that jumps out to me is this is just an awful sequence of events that Joseph has gone through. A lot of times when we've been mistreated, or we think things are not going the way that we'd like for them to go, we have a tendency to withdraw ourselves and don't have anything to do with anybody else. Life was hard on Joseph, but you know, Joseph chose not to be hard on other people. Have you ever known somebody that's just bitter? They're just ticked off at the world. That would be young people from the age of, 14 through, 21? But all the high school teachers are, yeah, that's it. But seriously, people can be just mad. They're just mad at the world, and you can't be around them. It's hard to deal with them. And so, you know, that's not what Joseph does. He doesn't have a pity party. He chose not to have this. He chooses to help people. And he sees a couple of fellows here that are in bad shape. So here he is. He's in prison, chapter 40. And there's this butler. and this baker. Boy, wouldn't you like to know more about that? I would like to know, what exactly did they do to make him so mad? Whatever it was, the baker must have been a lot worse. Well, anyway, they have a bad dream. But notice in verse 7. And he asked Pharaoh's officers, this butler and this cook, if you will, this baker, he asked them, wherefore look ye so sadly today? You know, Joseph's in prison. Here these guys are, and he can tell by their countenance they're not having a good day. And so he asked them, what's going on? Why are you looking so sad? And, of course, they tell him the dreams. The butler tells his dream first. He says, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and I squeezed them, and I gave the Pharaoh's hand. And he says, Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it, 3 branches or 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift up your head, and you're going to be put back right where you were before. Well, and it's going to be well with thee. And he says, when it is well with thee, would you remember me? He says, you're getting a big break here. Would you help me out here? I don't need to be here. I've done nothing wrong. I'm here, unjustly accused. And so he asked that. Well, the baker, of course, saw that the interpretation was great. And he says, well, what about my interpretation? He said, in my dream, there were 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket, there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. Well, poor old baker's not going to hear what he'd like to hear, is he? No, Joseph is going to be honest with him, though. It says, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up the head from off thee, and thou shalt hang on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. Well, that couldn't be what he wanted to hear. And sure enough, verse 29, came to pass, it's Pharaoh's birthday. He made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief butler. They gave the Pharaoh a cup from his hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Number 3 here under opportunities, focus on God. We need to focus on God. Joseph here, he learns of these men's problems, and he immediately turns to the Lord. He's able to help them through their situation and help them be an aid to them. But also on this idea of what to do when you're going through a difficult time, there's some expectations. We're going to look at 3 of those. First of all, expect that God is going to keep his promises. God's going to keep his promises. And you see, he gave Joseph the dreams of Genesis 37. Joseph just didn't come up with those. Those were something that God had given Joseph. And Joseph is going to keep his promises. He's going to open doors. God is going to keep his promises. Notice with me, if you will, Hebrews chapter 6. Would you turn there? Don't lose your place there in Genesis. But let's look at Hebrews chapter 6. Let's begin with verse 13. For when God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear no greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thee. And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. For men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of all strife. Shake the hands on it. That's exactly what's going to happen. We're making a covenant here, if you will. Wherein God, willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath. And 2 immutable things, it's impossible for God to lie. So we can rest assured that God is going to tell us the truth, and when God promises to forgive us, we're going to be forgiven. Let's turn, as we work our way back to Genesis, drop off in Jeremiah with me. Drop off in Jeremiah, because I want you to see a promise that God gives to Israel, and in turn is going to be given to spiritual Israel. Basically, it's talking about spiritual Israel. You're familiar with it because it's in Hebrews chapter 8. In Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 34, the longest quote I know of the Old Testament in the New, notice what Jeremiah 31:34 says. The last part. The Lord says, for I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. That's those that have become a Christian. The new covenant's been made. Folks are going to be a part of this covenant because they know who God is and they choose to obey the gospel. And God says, I am going to forgive their sins. God doesn't lie. God is going to keep his promises. And Joseph was given these dreams by God. God's going to keep those promises. Joseph's brethren are going to bow down to him as well as his father. Number two, expectations. Not only expect God to keep his promises, but number two, expect people to need your help. Expect people to need your help. We can help people without even having anything. Joseph helps these men, but where is he? He's in prison. Does he have any material things he can give these folks? Nothing more than a steward would have. I mean, he's in jail. He has no outside help or no outside support. But just his being there. I think sometimes we think because we may have limited resources, or perhaps we think we have limited talent, that I really can't be an asset, that I really can't help somebody that's going through a difficult time or help them to see something. You can. We were talking tonight to a couple of our young people here. It's so refreshing to be around them. They can be a great attribute for a congregation because they just bring a different look at things than we do when we're older. Older people can be a great asset in that they have all this experience to come back on, to rely on and tell you about. Yes, I've done that particular thing. Here's what happened to me. We all have talents. We all have experiences. We all have things that we can share with one another. And so we don't have to have a lot of stuff to help people. When we go through hard times, don't withdraw yourself. When we go through hard times, do not withdraw from family, from friends, from the church. These are the folks that are going to help you. They're the one. Don't look to the government. They ain't going to help you. If they do, it'll be 5 years after you need it. Remember when, trouble, what is it? Trouble is seconds away. Police are only 15, 20 minutes away. Don't rely. Friends, family, church, that's basically where you're going to get your help from. And with that being said, family, friends, church, if you're a part of one of those institutions of family, friends, and church, be there for other people. Be there for other people and realize I'm going to need their help. That's going to be my source of comfort one day. Number three, what to expect? Unfortunately, people will let you down. Expect it. Not that you don't have faith in folks, but just realize people have got their own lives and they're going through things too, and things happen. People will let you down. The cupbearer, notice what happens. The last verse of chapter 40, verse 23. Of course, verse 22, the vicar gets hung. Verse 23, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but he forgot him. Man, life's going again. Things are quick. Been restored to the Pharaoh. I've got to get up in the mornings. I've got to make sure all his wine's ready to go, and it's got to be perfect, and I'm getting paid again, and so I, go buy groceries for my family. Life's happening. And so he doesn't even remember Joseph. Notice the next verse, chapter 41, verse 1. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years. People will forget you. People will let you down. And notice what he says. I think this is pretty neat. Verse 9. Pharaoh, in this dream, really got him freaked out, right? Verse 9, he's wanting somebody to help him out. Nobody, the Egyptians, all his wise people, they can't interpret it. Verse 8. Verse 9 says, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Some of the newer translations go ahead and translate that. New American Standard says, I remember my offenses. Then it has footnote, sins. I did him wrong. I did Joseph wrong. He says to the Pharaoh, I want to tell you something. I did a young man wrong here. You see, and then he starts telling the tale. Notice he says, when you got mad at me, remember that you threw me in prison, put me in the ward of the captain's guardhouse. We dreamed a dream. In verse 12, and there was with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted us to our dreams. So 2 years later, this man finally remembers Joseph to mention Joseph. And what happens? Joseph is going to have an opportunity here now to approach the highest man in all of the kingdom. Let me show you a little bit something here. Now, this is free. This is kind of off the topic. But I want you to know in verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out. Man, the Pharaoh has called you. You got to come on the dungeon. But what does he stop and do? He got dressed. And he just didn't say, hold on a second, let me grab my prison robe here, What did he do? He shaved himself. He changed his raiment. He wanted to look nice. He wanted to be respectful when he went before the king. Now, brethren, there ought to be something there, a lesson there. And you might say, Ron, you're going to tell us we got to dress this way to go to church, things. I'm not going to get on to you about that, but I am going to tell you the different situations require different clothing. How would y'all think if all those Alabama players had showed up yesterday in tuxedos instead of football pads? Probably wouldn't have made a difference in the game. But anyway, you say, well, they're not properly dressed, But what if the band shows up and they don't bring their instrument? They don't have they're not there. They're not dressed right. You go to the bank and everybody's running around in flip-flops hitting the volleyball around, I'm not sure I want to do business here, There's certain ways that you go to a funeral. You expect people to be dressed nice, showing respect to the situation. That's what he's doing here. He's showing respect to the situation. So let's move on. People will disappoint you. And a lot of times people, when they're disappointed by other people, maybe it's a marriage, maybe it's a friendship, could be anything. A lot of times, as a result of that, they'll turn to alcohol, turn to drugs. I'm disappointed in life, the way things are going. And so instead of just keep doing, they turn to all these other ways to do things. And Joseph could have done that. You might say, well, Joseph's in prison, he can't do that. Trust me, you can do that. You ought to hear some of the stories my son had. Y'all ever heard of something called julep? Well, apparently you can take juice and you can take bread and you can put it in a garbage bag and you can make something that will get you drunk. Because those prisoners do it all the time. It's one of the hardest things they have, the police up there. But the jailhouse slang is called julep. Now, from what I hear, Eli says it smells like puke. But anyway, they get high on it, and so they enjoy it. So it can be done. But Joseph doesn't do that. What does he do? He keeps on. He keeps on. He didn't let this get him down. He kept on serving perhaps Potiphar. He keeps on serving whoever the head boss there was. He keeps on serving the fellow prisoners. More than anything, though, he keeps on serving the God of heaven. Joseph doesn't forget about God. Joseph doesn't get mad at God. He doesn't call God out and say, Lord, why have you done this to me? I am so ticked off. Why in the world would you do this to me? Notice what Joseph says. When he gets an opportunity now, you know how the story goes. Pharaoh's going to listen to what Joseph has to say, and he says, that makes sense. That's a good interpretation of the dream. Who else could do a better job of doing this 7-year famine, 7-year bountiful blessing thing better than a man that has the Spirit of God? Takes off his ring, gives it to Joseph, says, you're number 2 in the land. You're the second man in command. Make it happen. Joseph does that. And Pharaoh's getting real rich. This is about the 2nd year of the famine now, and everybody's starting to come by grain. Money's pouring in. Pretty soon he'll have all the land in Egypt. I mean, it's going his way. He thinks Joseph's the greatest thing in the world. But you'll remember that famine goes all the way up into Canaan. And now Joseph's brothers have to come down. Well, you remember the story. And they have to go back a second time. Notice what it says in Genesis chapter 45. And this is where it's coming to a head. Joseph's going to reveal himself now. There have been 2 visits. He's incarcerated one brother the whole time they were gone. This time they come back. Remember, he puts the glass in Benjamin's thing and the money. And so Judah comes forward and, he says, I pray thee, let thy servant, verse 33, this is Judah, his the fourth oldest, let me be a prisoner. But let this boy go home. It'll kill my daddy if they go home and he's not with them. Well, chapter 45, verse 1, Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him and cried and caused every man to go out. And Joseph stands there and makes himself known unto his brethren. Can you imagine? You're talking about, behold, your sins will find you out. Their sin is standing in front of them, and he now has the power to simply say, off with their heads. Have every one of them killed. Nobody would ask any questions. He doesn't do that. Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Oh, can you imagine? Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him. They are speechless. And they were troubled at his presence. Joseph said unto his brethren, come near, I pray you. And they came near, and Joseph said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. But now notice, this has been Joseph's attitude the whole time. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourself, that ye sold me hither, for God did not send me, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Notice verse 7, God sent me. Notice verse 8, this wasn't you. Yeah, you did it. You were wrong. But God had made me a father unto Pharaoh. God has put me in this position. And notice the end of verse 5, to preserve life. You were trying to do wrong. God took that wrong and made a great thing of it. Notice the work of God, the providence of God. Here Joseph is in a situation that just looks unattainable, just miserable, but Joseph does not change his attitude. He does not forget about God. He keeps serving God, and God takes this boy who had every right in the world to be bitter, be ticked off at his daddy for not coming looking for him, for his brethren, for selling him, for God, for putting him, as Job would think in this situation, at Potiphar's wife, at Potiphar. He had all these, the butler who for 2 years wouldn't even open his mouth, and do that. He kept on keeping on, serving God, and look at what happens. He becomes and is able to save his household, save his family. What a great example for us. We'll have opportunities. Those opportunities usually come from those closest around to us. That's why it's important that we cultivate and develop these relationships with family, friends, and the church. We have a lot of brethren, a lot of friends in this congregation, people who love you. Cultivate that. But also expect, first of all, God's not going to break his promises. People are going to need you. Last but not least, people sometimes are going to fail you. Not because they don't love you. It's just sometimes other things come up. Just expect that, and you won't be hurt by it. Perhaps you're here tonight not a child of God. Look at what God is doing in the life of Joseph. As Carrie pointed out, here you've got God talking about how through these nations, God is going to make his plan, his will is going to ultimately come about as a result of God working in everybody's lives, and God work in your life. He'll work in my life. We got to let him in. You need to obey the gospel if you're not a Christian. If in times past you've obeyed the gospel but you've left your first love, do not leave here tonight not ready to be called up to home or ready for the Lord to return. No sense in taking a chance with your soul. We can help you in any way. We encourage you to